McDonald's is basically everywhere. There's hardly anyone who doesn't recognize Ronald McDonald. The chain has restaurants in 120 countries across the globe. When Richard McDonald and Maurice McDonald founded the company in 1940, they probably had no idea that it would become the largest restaurant chain in the world by revenue. McDonald's has 37,200 restaurants globally. Only Subway has more restaurants than McDonald's, and the brand just keeps growing every year. McDonald's net revenue was $19.2 billion in 2020 compared to just $4 billion in 1985. McDonald's stock prices soared in the past decades. It is estimated that McDonald's serves at least 70 million people every day, which is almost 1% of the global population. To say that McDonald's has revolutionized the fast food industry would be an understatement. Out of all the 37,200 restaurants, McDonald's personally owns and operates just 2,636. About 93% of McDonald's restaurants are franchised. But McDonald's doesn't earn its primary revenue from food. Former McDonald's CFO Harry Sunburn is even quoted as saying, "We are not technically in the food business, we're in the real estate business." So how does McDonald's actually make its money? McDonald's was able to grow so fast and reach so many countries around the world through franchising. The credit for franchising McDonald's goes to businessman Ray Kroc, who later became the owner of McDonald's. 93% of the restaurants are essentially owned by independent owners who just lease the McDonald's name and brand, but unlike other franchises, McDonald's owns the land the stores are built on. McDonald's makes much of its revenue by buying the physical properties and then leasing them to franchisees, often at large markups. In fact, 64% of its revenue in 2019 came from rent. Essentially, McDonald's is a real estate company, and the only reason they sell food is because it's the greatest producer of revenue, from which their tenants can pay rent. To have an idea of how big the McDonald's real estate business is, we have to look at its 2019 balance sheet. It reported over $37 billion in property and equipment. That amount would make it the fifth largest real estate company in the world. Here's how all of it works. The McDonald's real estate team keeps looking for potential land where they can build a new restaurant. The land must fulfill certain criteria. The available space must be approximately 45,000 square feet in area, with additional room to build on approximately 4,500 square feet. The location must also be located at the intersection of two roads. After choosing the location, McDonald's either buys it or leases it for a long period of time. McDonald's then builds a new restaurant on the selected location and picks up a new franchise owner from a pool of applicants. Buying into a McDonald's franchise isn't cheap, and if prospective franchisees want to become a part of the burger giant's long list of restaurants, they'll have to bring some heavy coin to the table. The initial investment is usually between $1 million and $2.2 million. That price tag is pretty broad, but McDonald's notes that these costs are based on the restaurant's location and size. Long story short, it's going to cost a lot more to buy a McDonald's franchise in San Francisco than it's gonna cost in Detroit. McDonald's requires the new owners to pay 40% of the initial investment cost upfront in cash. The remaining balance of the purchase price may be financed for a period of no more than 7 years. The potential owner also has to pay a franchise fee of $45,000. A 20-year term is generally set for the franchised agreement. The applicant also has to go through a phone interview and then travel to McDonald's headquarters for a panel interview. The franchisees are responsible for paying salaries, ordering supplies, and maintenance of the restaurant. Raw material supplies can be ordered only from a supplier that McDonald's provides. Under McDonald's conventional franchise agreement, franchisees pay a monthly fee to McDonald's which is equivalent to 4% of the total monthly sales. They must also pay monthly rent, which typically consists of a fixed base rent and a percentage of restaurants' gross sales. It can be as high as 12% in some locations. McDonald's business model is recession proof. During the financial crisis of 2008, while all the other companies were struggling, McDonald's saw an opportunity to take advantage of low real estate prices and bought a significant amount of properties. Every recession provides the company an opportunity to buy more land at cheap rates. Also, no matter how low the burger sales are, the base rent is fixed, and therefore that's a part of McDonald's fixed monthly income that would never vary. Even during the coronavirus pandemic, when most of the restaurant dine-in services were impacted, McDonald's didn't suffer a lot because, say hi to our old friend, fixed base rent. In a nutshell, being able to collect rents helps insulate them from the ups and downs of the business of flipping burgers. You have to make rent after all. In fact, McDonald's charges its tenants rent that's usually higher than the current market rate. And after 20 years, when the franchise agreement ends, McDonald's still owns the piece of land it leased to the restaurant. McDonald's has been gradually increasing the number of franchisees and is aiming for a 95% franchisee-owned restaurants. So why become a franchisee? The biggest reason is the risk-free investment. On an average, a McDonald's restaurant makes $2.7 million in revenue annually. And after accounting for all the costs and expenses, the owner still makes an average profit of $150,000. The business is risk-free because McDonald's essentially provides all the material, machinery, training, and not to mention the massive brand value of the burger giant. The owner essentially is taking home a relatively risk-free salary of $150,000 every year. Another lure is that McDonald's provides the franchisees with an almost guaranteed moneymaker due, in large part, to the impressive margins. The restaurant industry is infamous for its turnover, and one major reason for this is that the margins can be thinner than a slice of processed American cheese. Yet McDonald's operating margins are quite thick, north of 40%. How is that possible in a business whose very purpose is providing inexpensive food? The answer lies in the fact that the food is even cheaper to prepare than one might think. Some menu items, coffee for instance, sell for dozens of times their cost. Note to people who think nothing of paying $5 for an iced mocha, you're drinking a few pennies worth of beans boiled in water that's too cheap to measure and some chocolate syrup. While it's certainly obvious that McDonald's makes a killing through the franchise system, this is actually out of necessity. At least for the global growth that McDonald's has achieved. McDonald's brought in $27.4 billion in revenue in 2014, and how that breaks down is pretty telling. As for that revenue, $9.2 billion of it was from franchise locations and $18.2 billion was attributed to company-owned locations. On the surface, it looks like company-owned locations are the real moneymakers, but that's not the case. The cost of running a business, especially a restaurant, can really eat into its profits. At the end of the day, McDonald's only keeps around 16% of the revenue its company-owned stores make, but it keeps 82% of the revenue franchisees pay out to it. So in 2014, the company earned around $7.5 billion from the franchise locations and $2.9 billion from company-owned locations. All that adds up to megabucks for the company, and while franchise owners do make some coin, the business itself is who really wins.